Hey everyone, welcome to Infill Lot Recon. My name is Mike Marshall with WholesaleLandDepot.com. For more than a decade, I've been helping investors learn how to avoid the landmines and capitalize on the opportunities that exist with vacant infill lots. If you have a goal of becoming or an infill lot investor, you're in the right place. So today I'm going to try to do a little bit something different. Up until now, I've written a script for each episode that I more or less have followed to a T. The problem with that is that it doesn't really work good for me. I don't work good with scripts. For some reason, I end up stumbling all over them and mix up my words and everything like that. Some people love them. Some people swear by them and wouldn't dream of doing anything otherwise. But for me, I just can't operate with them. They just make it too complicated for me, I guess. So anyway, throughout my career, I've made presentations to hundreds of groups, and with rare exception, I've never really used a script. I find, like I said, I stumble over my words and I make it worse at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making my presentations with more of an outline type format. So it's going to be a little bit more free flow. If I end up stumbling over my words still, please forgive me. But with today, I'm just going to start with kind of more of an outline type approach. So today's topic is more about some due diligence on some infill lots, and what I'm going to be talking about today is zoning and land use restrictions. And so some of the things I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about kind of like the purpose of zoning in general, but I'm going to go into also some of the restrictions that come along with it. And so in general, the purpose of zoning is to separate incompatible land uses into designated areas called zones. And so the idea is that you're going to separate residential from commercial from industrial type uses. And that's the general idea, and it gets really a lot more nuanced as we'll talk about as we go along here. But classic examples of that would be separating like a fat rendering plant or a hog ranch away from residential uses. Nobody wants to be downwind from a manure facility or something like that. So the idea is that you want to separate these incompatible land uses so that way you have an overall harmony within the community. And that's the whole idea behind planning in general. Does it happen that way all the time? Of course not. There's issues all the time, and that's why you have fields such as land use law and things like that. So again, these uses are found on something that's usually called a permitted use chart or similar within the municipal code of a city. And what happens is that it's not as simple usually as residential, commercial, industrial land uses and leaving it like that. Really what ends up happening is that there's a multitude of uses within each of those broader categories, and you can almost think of them more as like business types in a sense, especially in the commercial side. So on the residential side, you may have something that says, single family or two family type zoning or triplex or four family type homes, or, maybe you have a multifamily type zoning. And typically it is, like I said, nuanced within the general residential classification. So you'll have some single family zoning designations. You'll have some zoning designations that'll allow for duplexes and triplexes, some that'll allow for fourplexes, some that'll allow for multifamily, some that will allow for multifamily up to a certain density. In other words, a number of units per acre. So you may have something that's, allow for multifamily at 11 units an acre, something that will allow for multifamily at up to 30 units an acre. So you'll have multiple zoning designations. So it kind of comes in these more nuanced layers. Within the commercial side, like I said, it's more about kind of business types. And so it's not as simple as commercial. You have something that might be auto repair type uses. And then even in that, it's even more nuanced. You'll have auto repair and then auto body painting. You'll have, it's separated into those types of categories. Then you'll have things that'll be like, food related uses. Well, it's not just as simple as food related uses. It gets nuanced even more. You have full service restaurants and you have limited service restaurants. Then you have catering facilities, and then you'll have, takeout only restaurants, so it gets really nuanced down to the type of business in a very specific way. And as time and trends change, then, you end up adding and removing different use types to those permitted use charts, because again, the business environment changes, and so the code for each city will try to adapt to that eventually. So that's the point, is that, zoning is much more nuanced than it being just separated into these general categories. If you're looking just at residential infill lots, the thing that you just need to be aware of is like, hey, do I have a zoning designation for single family, two family, triplex, fourplex, multifamily? You want to know what that is. One day you may come across a lot that's technically an infill lot and you may have a commercial zoning designation on it. And if you have a commercial zoning designation, then at that point you really need to dig a little bit further into the permitted use charts to get a sense for what's approved in that specific commercial zone and what's not approved or prohibited. Sometimes you'll have certain types of uses that'll be permitted, but it'll be subject to something called a use permit. Sometimes there's something that's really common called a conditional use permit. Other places you'll have something that's called a minor use permit or a special use permit or something similar to that. But you want to have an understanding for the types of uses that would be allowed in that zone, because ultimately the type of uses that are in that zone speak directly to the type of end user that you're going to be looking for. So that's just some things to think about in terms of how zoning is nuanced in these multiple layers. For infill lots, the restrictions are typically found in the development standards section as well. And so when that section will talk about things like maximum building height, setbacks. In other words, setbacks are the distance that a building or structure has to be set back or set away from a property line. In a lot of jurisdictions, you may have it where, you can be up to 5 feet from a side property line, 15 feet from the back property line, and 20 from the front. That's a pretty standard type of setbacks. And again, it differs by jurisdiction and it differs by zones at times too. So you don't want to take these numbers as hard and fast, but it's just giving you an example. Again, it talks things about building height. It'll talk about things like density, how many units per acre. It'll talk about things about lot coverage, like in other words, how much of your actual lot can be covered by structures. And that only matters really when you start looking at adding accessory structures onto an existing house or something like that. That's stuff that more of the end buyer or builder will probably be looking at more than you as an investor that's looking to flip. But getting a sense for, what can be built on the property is really a good idea to kind of consider. Because basically what these development standards are doing is it's creating a postage stamp in which you can ultimately build on. You want to get a sense for how big that stamp actually is, because that's going to speak to what kind of or size of house can be built, and that also then really leads into what can be marketable. You may be in an environment where a 1,200 square foot house is really marketable and that's ideal. And, when you can only limit it to 800 square feet, that's not going to do you anything. And that happens from time to time. So you just want to be aware of what can actually be built. So an example of this, I'll tell you one story as we kind of conclude, but my general really message is that zoning restrictions really does come down to, for the residential infill lot investors, zoning restrictions really comes down to you getting a feel to understand what can actually be built on the property, what the size of that postage stamp actually looks like, so that way that can ultimately be conveyed to your end buyer. They're going to want to know that they can build something that's marketable. You want to know that that's the case as well before you go in and buy. And so with that, I'll kind of leave you with one example of a lot that I've dealt with in the past. There's a lot in a community that I've worked in that is actually a legal lot. It's on a corner. It's in a residential zone. And it's a great lot. The only thing is that this particular lot is only 25 feet wide, and so it's probably about 75 or 100 feet deep. So it's really fine on the depth side or the length, but it's only 25 feet wide. So what does that ultimately leave you with? If you're in a zone that has 5 foot setbacks from either side, now you're in a situation where you go 25 feet minus 10, you're down to 15 feet. Who wants a 15-foot wide house? Now, there are examples of that actually working, obviously. There's communities that have these shotgun-style houses. And if you're in that neighborhood that's common with 25-foot lots, then you have no problem. You'll be able to build something that's compatible and similar to the other houses that are built in that area. But if you're on a 25-foot lot and all the other lots in the area are 50, 75, etc., and they have houses that are much more of your standard single-family residential size, and this lot's only 25 feet wide, what are you going to get? You're going to get a 15-foot wide house that's maybe 75, 100 feet deep. Can it be usable? Sure, it can be usable. It's going to have an awkward floor plan, and there might be an ultimate buyer for that. But you have to be aware of this, because a lot more builders are going to stay away from it. And honestly, a lot more of the homeowners are probably going to stay away from it too, because it's not something that they're looking for within that neighborhood. So you got to be aware of what can be built on the property, because again, it speaks to marketability. If you buy the lot cheap enough, then maybe it doesn't matter, but you still have to be able to find an end buyer. And most builders are going to steer clear of something that's a 25-foot lot in a community that has mainly these 50 to 75-foot lots, because again, what they can build just isn't compatible with the rest of the community. And if you're looking to buy something and sell it fast, even if you buy it cheap, it still may not sell fast if it's something that's just not comparable with that neighborhood. So that lot is certainly an anomaly. It certainly is sat that way, likely because of that. It doesn't have any easements or any other restrictions. Technically, it can be built on, but at the end of the day, again, I've said it a few times now, is it actually marketable? So it's something that you want to think about, So when you look at zoning restrictions, get an idea what you can actually build, and specifically for residential development. We'll do other episodes later on when we're talking about commercial infill lots, but primarily right now for residential infill lots, get a sense for what can be built. Think about whether it's marketable. Think of the end buyer builder. See if it's something that they're interested in down the road, and you'll do yourself a lot of favors. So with that, I'm going to end this episode of Infill Lot Recon. Check out our next episode where we'll talk more about infill lot due diligence that will help you avoid the landmines and take advantage of the opportunities found with infill lot investing. If you have any questions or comments, or if you're interested in my consulting services, go ahead and email me at info@wholesalelanddepot.com. As always, you can find us on YouTube or on our website at wholesalelanddepot.com. See you next time. Thanks.